Okay, I'm working on the first quadrant of one of my custom puzzle t-shirt quilts. And if we go over here, we can see my mock-up that I've done in Illustrator. And what I do after I get it mocked up, the customer approves it, then I mark out quadrants that I'm going to sew my blocks together in. That makes it easier for me. So right now I'm working on the first quadrant, and you can see the line I've drawn here. And here are the pieces represented here. And I've already sewn some of them together. But what I'm doing now in this process is looking for pieces that I can sew together that don't require partial seams. So these two right here I can sew together. And these two right here I can sew together. But what I'm going to do first is, in order to sew this unit to this unit, I'm going to attach these two together with a partial seam, and then once those are sewn together, then I have two lines here. I can sew that seam together, and then we will go from there. Okay, so we're over at the cutting table where I do my pinning, or actually clipping, and I'm just going to flatten these pieces out. And I've got this right side up, and I'm going to put these right sides together. And I'm just going to let them kind of fall where they would naturally. We're not stretching anything. And I'm just going to pin. I'm going to start in that corner. And at the seam intersections, I'm going to open the seams and put a clip there. And then we'll put a clip here. I like to put pin or clips about every 4 inches. And this one, the seam here also from this end and also about right here and back stitch, and that'll give me a partial seam. So I will. Okay, so I joined this piece here, and there's a partial seam here. So now what I have is a straight seam that I can sew from here all the way down to right here. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that seam together, and I'll be over at the cutting mat to pin those or clip those. Okay, so I've got both pieces here, and what I'm going to do is just lay them out so they're flat. And again, the name of the game is not stretching anything. So you want to avoid having things hanging off the side of the table, because that will cause a stretch. And I want to line these up end to end. And what I'm going to do is put a clip on both ends. And we won't need any partial seams in this one. So after I get a clip on both ends, just kind of let them lay naturally without being stretched, and see if everything is going to lay nice and flat, and it should. And once I have everything nice and flat, I'm just going to pin or clip every 4 inches. That's my comfort zone. And I'm also going to clip the intersections, and I'll clip the seam open. I've got an 8-inch span here, so we add another clip. And there you go. So let's go ahead and sew this over at the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm back at the design wall and I've got my pieces stitched together. So now I see that I have a partial seam here, but now I can finish this seam. So I'm going to attach these together. Once these are attached together, then I can finish this partial seam here, and so that'll give me all of this sewn together. And then after, well, let's do that first. Okay, so I'm at my cutting table and I'm going to attach these together. So I'm just going to lay it down and loosen up any stretch. And then I'm always going to take my two end corners together first and clip those. And this, since this is a shorter seam, I'm just going to get it nice and flat there. And it looks like I just need one more clip, and I'll clip this seam open. So I'll back stitch here where I ended my partial seam for the last seam, and then just stitch here to the end. Okay, so I got that seam stitched here, and now I see that I can finish this partial seam. Just going to fold that, get any stretch out, and I'm going to attach it at the corner first. With a clip, and just let everything lay naturally. And then I'm going to open up the one seam allowance that I have, clip that. Here's where my last partial seam ended, so I'll just back stitch here up against that last one that was back stitched. And I've got an 8-inch span here, so I'll put a clip here. So I've got my clips approximately every 4 inches. I'll start here and just sew down, and I'll meet at this line here and back stitch. Okay, so I joined these two together and these two together. And in order to finish piecing these, there's a couple steps that I'm going to take. I'm going to take this one, and I'm just going to sew a partial seam here to attach that. And I'm going to sew these two together and just do a partial seam. So then I can add these two will be one unit. I can add a partial seam here, and then after doing that, I'll be able to add the top and the bottom section together, and that will finish quadrant 1. So when I'm sewing partial seams, if I have a 4-inch block, or I think in 4-inch blocks, I usually will sew 2 inches or about halfway in. So you can see this one is about halfway in to the 4-inch section. It might be a little bit more, but that's what I aim for. So then when I go to attach a side piece here, I have enough room to pin it where I've got everything out of the way and the fabric isn't being stretched. But I'll go ahead and continue sewing on. Okay, so now that I have my units all sewn together, I can attach these two units together in one complete seam. If we go over to the photo here, we can see that these end together, and this will be just one long seam. Now, typically I don't like to have long seams in these quilts, but that's the way this one worked out. I prefer to have them broken up, and most of the rest of them are broken up. I keep mine in a little vinyl pocket, and I can make notes on here that I can just erase as I go and reuse them for the next project. But it makes it nice to be able to hang it up without poking additional holes in the wall. But let's go ahead and get, okay, so in order to do this long seam, I've got them laid out on the cutting table. I've put clips on both ends, and I'm just going to kind of get them to relax naturally. And I'm going to look for any common seams. So these two are going to come together. So I'm just going to push the seams open and line up the seams. And that'll get a clip. And I do not like to have 4 seams coming together whenever possible to keep the puzzle effect. Sometimes that's just the way it is. And so now I'm just going to pin open any seams that I have. And everything should lay together nicely. And nothing is stretched. I kind of like to let it fall naturally. And I've got a seam here. A seam here. And once I've got all the seams clipped, I've got every 4 inches from here to here. Now I'm just going to add one in the center. And add one in the center of this 8-inch block here. That had a little bit of stretch in it, and I just want to make sure that I release that so that it will distribute evenly. Okay, so I've got my clips every 4 inches. I'll take this over to the sewing machine, and this will be the end of quadrant 1. And that'll get folded up and put into the quadrant 1 envelope, and then I'll pull out quadrant 2, and according to the Illustrator diagram that I have, I'll lay that out on my design wall and sew those together. I'll meet you back. So I've got my second quadrant up on the wall, and first thing I'm going to do is look for some easy pieces I can piece together, and right away I see that I can put these two together and then join this unit to this block. And then once I have those 3 sewn together, I can sew it to the bottom of this block. And then up here, I can do a partial seam about 2 inches over to sew these two together. And then I can sew this unit to this unit. Once those are sewn together, then I can sew this unit to this unit. You see how it goes? It's just a sew together, and then I put it back up on the wall and then see what opportunity opens for the next one. And I confirm that I have all my pieces according to the master plan that I have done in Illustrator. But I'll